sports columnist and basketball expert, Kieran Shannon. Kieran, how are you?
I'm good, John. Thanks. I don't know if I'm an expert.
You would be now. You wrote one of the seminal books in the sport. We planned to do this item, Kieran, before the government woke up and said they would allow underage players to play basketball. So we had a situation where juvenile games are being cancelled. Under 12s, we know in the country, can't get vaccinated. We have approximately 750 schools waiting 20 months to play. Coaches and teachers can't legally ask under 18s to produce a vaccine cert. There are over 20,000 club members under the age of 18 who play basketball. Maybe give us a background, Kieran, to what happened and why it was so out of sync with the rest of the world.
Yeah, so I suppose basketball has had a challenging, like a lot of sports since March the 11th, 2020. It's had a lot of challenges, but it's I suppose basketball was the first sport in the country to shut down. I remember it was ahead of the J by about 16 hours, and that meant it's the end of its National League. The playoffs didn't go ahead, and everyone accepted, like we were in a new situation. So it shut down, and then you had last autumn, on the eve of when the National League was supposed to go ahead, it was pulled. Obviously, we had to go outdoors then. And then, like other sports, we were able to play outdoors in April 2021, and we were due to go back in on September the 20th. We went back in, and we were all looking forward to the season starting for everybody on October the 22nd, and a couple of games might have been played. But, like, I know my own young fella who's a 10-year-old was due to play his first ever game of basketball on last Sunday, but on the Thursday night. So last Thursday week, that night, it emerged that there could be no basketball for anyone who couldn't produce a vaccine passport. And as you said, John, a 10-year-old hasn't been vaccinated, so how can they have a vaccination passport? And also, as you said, you can't ask the vaccine status of a student, so that meant the schools program ground to a halt. And it led to a lot of frustration because it was one thing to lose a season, but if you lost a second season, you really were looking at the sport being on its knees, because playing the game was just becoming a distant memory to the kids, and those particularly who are multi-sport athletes would just lean towards playing other sports where it was less complicated. But thankfully, the basketball community rallied, and now that exemption for under 18 has been put in place.
Yeah, Jack Chambers came out with that tweet yesterday. Today the government has agreed to address the issue of under 18 games and competitions, particularly for basketball. Amongst other indoor sports, this has been amended so indoor games competitions can take place for under 18s, and Sport Ireland will provide detail to sporting organisations. I kind of feel lucky for the government, because we would have, had obviously a lot of righteous anger in this slot this week if they hadn't changed their policy and had a bit of common sense around it. Is it a case? I don't think I would be amazed if there's any deliberate policy making issues around this, but it just seems that basketball sometimes is a bit of an afterthought. Would that be a fair reflection?
Well, indoor sport in general, and I don't know what it's like for you, John, in Dublin, but it's rough enough here, Clare, today, and we should be an indoor sport in power. And look, boxing, we're very strong, an Olympic sport. But basketball is actually, this is the thing about it, it's a huge participation sport in this country. I mean, I suppose competitively, internationally, for various reasons. And thankfully, this next week, the women's international team will be back playing Eurobasket competition. But it's been documented that for 5 or 6 years, we didn't have senior national teams because of the financial crisis the national governing body was in. But Ireland has competed at a decent level before, but it's a world sport, so it's very hard to compete in. So we're not, let's say, winning Olympic medals in basketball because the rest of the world plays basketball when maybe the rest of the world doesn't play other sports. But it's a huge sport. It's the second biggest sport in the country, and it's a very big sport in this country. Participation-wise, among girls outside of in the schools, it's the biggest participation sport you have. It's the most played PE sport we have. So, and as you say, 750 schools were ready and will now thankfully be able to play, which is second highest among boys and the highest among girls. So it's a huge sport in this country, but it maybe wouldn't have the sway or the profile of, the big three sports in particular, because, obviously, look, historical reasons, they have been the big sports in this country. But so I think indoor sports in general have been overseen, and kind of COVID has reflected that. And definitely the expert group, particularly last autumn, winter, it seemed like they didn't even consider indoor sports. And there was a bit of that at play again in that ruling that came out last week. But thankfully it's been overturned.
We also have Hannah Thornton on the line, the DCU Mercy and Irish international basketball player. Hannah, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Not too bad, thanks, Hannah. When you saw the story develop, Hannah, was there a sense of shock, or was it a case of, oh, here we go again?
Immediately there was a sense of shock, primarily because it came out of nowhere. We did not see this coming at all. However, Basketball Ireland can sometimes doesn't get all the support that it needs sometimes. So for us to be shut down again, that wasn't such a shock. But the fact that it came out of nowhere, with all of the younger kids looking forward to get back playing and get back playing against each other, that was the biggest shock.
And have we got the season salvaged now, Hannah? Is it going to be a situation where you can get everything up and running now?
Yeah, that's what we've heard, is that we can get everything up and running. I coach a couple of teams, and to tell the girls that I coach that they couldn't play, it was just so heartbreaking for me. But now we're back up and going again, so we're excited. However, I'm a bit cautious at the same time to hopefully they don't pull the plug again. Don't think that they will, but from what I've heard in the past few days, we're back up and running, just as we were beforehand, like a week and a half ago.
How have you coped over the last 20 months, Hannah? Must not have been easy, especially, I wouldn't imagine training outdoors has been easy. There was also these rules about restrictions around passing the ball and pods of 6. Are some of those restrictions still in play?
So the pods of 6, I'm not quite too sure about that, because that did come into play last week with regards to who's vaccinated and who's not, and the pods of 6 for underage. We were lucky because if you're part of the national team, the senior national team, we were classified as elite, so we could train. The training outdoors was definitely something to kind of get a grips with, because that was one of the reasons I started playing basketball, was to not play an outdoor sport. For the underage, I think they did really, really well. They adapted to playing outdoors. It was great. There is some great facilities around, especially around Dublin where I am, with regards to playing outdoors. But as a senior team, we never did. DCU, we never went outside. We couldn't get most of the girls outside. But again, lucky enough that I was part of that elite squad that we could train individually inside. That's what Sport Ireland allowed us to do. But we couldn't play as a team up until, I think it was April of this year, or March of this year, we could finally come back playing as a team for the Irish team.
Kieran, where's the sport at the moment in terms of its arc, in terms of its progression? Is it in a healthy place?
I think so. I mean, Hannah's going to be going into camp with the national team on Monday, going over to Amsterdam on Wednesday, playing against the Dutch national team on Thursday, playing in the arena on Sunday week on live national television, which is something that the sport hasn't had since 2009. So, as Hannah said, the national teams would have got back training maybe individually in around March, and then in the end of April they were able to go back training as a collective when nobody else could train indoors, and they competed very well in Cyprus, and with the national senior men's team doing so well as well in the small countries and winning it in Dublin in August. They are also in a qualifier to go into the qualifiers, you could argue. They're at a slightly different level, but they're going to be competing towards the end of the month against, it's not just the small countries like we've had before the last 6 years. So the national team is a reflection as well as shaping the health of the sport, and that's a measure again that we haven't had teams playing in Eurobasket qualifiers since 2009 because again it's been well documented the financial crisis that the national governing body was in and national teams were pulled. So right there is a measure of how the sport has progressed. That debt is now gone. You have a lot of people from, Eastern Europe now helping coaching the sport. Their children are playing the sport. A lot of people who, like people of African descent who would have come to Ireland. Soccer and basketball are the two sports they gravitate to mostly. And they're making international underage and senior squads now. So it's great to see. So, yeah, the sport is in a very good place. COVID has challenged it hugely because of what we've just touched upon. And that's why it was so important that, yes, we were going to have, Hannah was going to be playing in the Super League. They had the elite exemption status, but the underage was under serious threat. But now we thankfully have the best of both worlds. So I would say, yeah, the sport is in a very good place.
Yeah, Hannah, Kieran was saying there, and John Duggan, the Garvey's Treaty Warriors and Mercy Secondary School juvenile coach, was quoted this week as saying that kids come to Ireland, they begin their new life, having come from Eastern Europe or Africa, and basketball is what they take up. Have you found that it's a leading sport when it comes to inclusivity?
Absolutely. I think anybody that doesn't play basketball doesn't realise how big of a community we have in the sport. But if you look at any school, if you go into any school, the different nationalities and the different countries that are there, it is amazing to see because basketball is played in nearly every single country and it is really, really big. It's not the biggest sport here for people that are outside of it, but it's great to see a sport that can bring so many different nationalities together. And especially in schools, it's just like this common ground. The rules are the same everywhere. It's great to always see everybody coming together and playing the sport. And it's just, that was one thing that was really, really hard for the younger people this past week was they've been without it for so long. So they were so excited to come back. So then to have it gone again, it's kind of like, oh, well, will we play this sport or will we play other sports? Like an outdoor sport that's nearly always guaranteed, not always guaranteed, but we'll keep going throughout this. They haven't been stopped. So that was one of the kind of the scary things was, oh, are we going to lose an age group here that we could develop for years to come, or will they keep going? And hopefully, because the kind of the pause was so short, they will keep going and we won't lose anybody, hopefully. One
of the key things we touched upon when we did the Future of Sport series on Off the Ball at the start of the year, Hannah and Kieran, was the dropout of especially teenage girls from sport. How was your interest maintained, Hannah, when you were, say, in your teenage years in basketball?
I was really lucky. I was part of a really, really good school group. We were coached by Jerome Westbrooks in Holy Faith and in Holy Faith in Clontarf, and they have a great basketball community. So once you got in there, it was very hard to leave it. And I was also part of Colester Basketball Club, and they have a great underage program. So I played with the girls that were really, really into it. I played with the girls that wanted to win. And I think that can be quite easy for someone to keep going, where it's hard when you might not be winning so much, or like you're not part of a group. Like I played with Sarah Woods, Leah Westbrook, Sarah McGrath, all these older age players that I would have looked up to. So that kind of got me going and really, really interested. And you need to have the people surrounding you. So you need to have good community, or you need to have good coaches to help you to keep going. That was one massive thing. I was really, really lucky to be coached by great coaches so that they would help you progress, and then you could see the improvements. You just need communities to keep going, and I think that's massive for young girls to keep them into the sport. It's not necessarily always about winning. It's like playing with your friends, having them enjoy it. But if you can get the people involved to keep them going, that's one step in the right direction.
Well, it's free. It's indoors. We have bad weather in this country at times. I feel when I'm kind of listening to this, Kieran, that basketball is trying to fight for a slice of the pie, and the GA also has got a very much a voluntary and a community-based ethos, is the big beast in the room, and you've soccer and you've rugby and you've all these competing sports. But if people want to attend a game in Tralee or South Dublin or Moycullen or Belfast, how do we get more people, I suppose, interested in the sport? I know Kieran Donaghy, who's on this show, is a great ambassador for basketball, but I almost feel at times maybe The Last Dance was the greatest advert for basketball rather than other things that probably should be,
Yeah, I mean, I think the national team being back is huge because the National League look is still big, and you mentioned Kieran. I mean, I would say a Saturday night in Tralee, like I know my own young fella and daughter, I bring them down regularly there in the last 3 or 4 years before COVID, and that place is rocking on a Saturday night. It's as good a place to be in the winter months to see a sporting event. The place is just rocking, and Hannah knows from playing big games in the arena, like basketball, when you have any crowd in the house and you have a good, close, competitive game, there's very few things in sport, Irish sport, like it. In terms of so I think that's one way of doing it. But the new CEO comes from he's taking up the spot next week, and I think he got the job to push it to another level of profile. I mean, he would have been heavily involved in promoting the Six Nations, and yeah, the sport does probably need a bigger profile because the National League, I think Irish sport in general over the last 10 or 12 years, it's the national teams that have really caught the attention. Like you take the Irish women's team is doing really well now. Yeah. There's good crowds going to Tala. It's getting a high media profile. It's the green flag that moves the media more than, let's say, the domestic National League. So that's why I think the fact Hannah and the girls are back in competition this week is huge.
And what are your hopes for these qualifiers for these 2023 Euro basketball finals, Hannah?
We're hoping to do as well as we can. We fly over on Wednesday to Holland and we'll play there, and we are just so excited to get back playing. It's great that it was a short window for us from when we played in July. We've kept the same great coaching staff and a few new faces on the team as well, which is really, really good. But we're hoping to do our best. We're getting back to the arena on Sunday week to play in front of a big crowd, so that will be great for us. We're really, really excited to finally play in front of a crowd and on home soil. So we're hoping to play our best next week, and then we don't play for another couple of months. So it's usually we only play in the summer for small nations, as Kieran said, but we've qualified now for the next level. So now the next level, we've kind of upped our game a little bit to play now this week, and then we'll play again in, I think it's 2022, November again. So it's kind of a bigger break. So we know that we need to lock in this week, play as good as we can, because we won't have it for another couple of months. But we're really, really excited to get going again.
How do you manage the work-life balance then, Hannah? You're involved in nutrition and performance consultancy, I believe.
Yeah, I have my own business, which is quite helpful because I can kind of plan my hours around training, and like for next week I've taken the week off. I'm quite lucky with that regard. So the fact that I can do my own hours, a couple of the other girls definitely had to take time off work. Some of them are teachers, but we've been lucky enough that I think we've been supported by our businesses as much as possible, and they know the magnitude of this week coming up. So I think our employers have been quite nice to us. I think I've been nice to myself. I give them a week off.
The golden age, Kieran, I think you've chronicled before, Paudie O'Connor recruiting Americans, the 80s, the real growth of the sport, and then we obviously had troubled times as well that we're coming out of. How do we get back there? Is it possible to get back there? Are we in a different era now?
I don't think it's comparing like to like. I'd always say I think the National League, that was the heyday of the National League, but there's more to Irish basketball than the National League, although we have a good standard in it. You'll never again have the magic or the novelty you had in that era, but as I said, that doesn't mean the best days of Irish basketball are behind us. I think they're here and ahead of us because that's the legacy of the 80s. I mean, Hannah just referenced Jerome Westbrook, who I was talking to last week. He was on the phone, worried about our kids going to be able to play the sport, and thankfully that's been reversed, as we pointed out. But my point is that's the legacy of the 80s. Wasn't, wow, isn't this great? It's that because Jerome and that wave of American players, many who are still over here, the likes of Ed Randolph and Gerald Kennedy, are still coaching the sport, and the Irish players of that era, and people like myself I was 10, my own young fella's age. This weekend, 40 years ago, I went to my first National League game, Demons, Burgerland, and it just blew my mind. And I'm coaching Clare Comets here in just outside Ennis, under 14, 15, 16s, and those girls, you know, they love the sport, and I think again there's a bright future for Irish basketball, and I think I think our best days are ahead of us. The league itself, I don't know if it'll ever have that novelty or magic that it had in the 80s, but there's more again to the sport. I think our national teams are going to have it's in the future. You know, there was a great noughties women's team, the likes of Michelle Aspel, Michelle Fahy, Niamh Grania de Wire. I think that was post-80s, and like the point is that the golden age, I think, is ahead of us here in terms of the national teams, and the participation levels of the sport, I think, are going to just increase.
National teams and national heroes, Hannah. I think that's what it's about, people that we can identify with. We saw with soccer this week, Katie McCabe getting that award, and they're really now connecting with the public. Absolutely.
Like, you have to be able to see these, especially female athletes, doing well, to be able to look up to somebody. And that campaign, that 2020 campaign, was absolutely brilliant. You can't see, you can't be. Having role models like that will just get more girls into the sport, which is what we want, and of course young boys as well. But for females to be out there in the media showcasing their talent and what they can do is absolutely amazing, it's also great because T.G. Cahir is going to be is supporting Basketball Ireland now for next week, and we'll have the games on T.G. Cahir on Sunday, which is brilliant for us. Usually that only happens for the National Cup final, but to have our Ireland senior women's team on the television, especially for young people to watch at home if they can't make it, will be absolutely amazing, and hopefully we'll get more players into the sport. Yeah. How much training are you doing a week then, Hannah? So it's quite difficult actually for the past few weeks because our season has started. James, our coach, tried to organise training as much as possible. So if we play on a Saturday, he'll have all the girls come together on a Sunday, or even if we play on a Sunday, he'll have them come together on a Sunday evening. But we have training now tomorrow evening, and we go into camp on Monday. So we'll have a couple of 2 days before we fly out on Wednesday. To be fair to him, I think he did the best that he could with the short time frame that he did have. I think keeping the same group that went away in July and adding some new faces was a really, really good idea, because we kind of know how each other's plays. But we've done a good bit of work in the short time that we've had, and I think we'll be able to just tweak our little things over the next few days to have us ready for Thursday. Was it hard to get your skills back up to absolute 100% given all the issues in the pandemic, Hannah? It was a little bit. Now, I think we were allowed to be in the hall by ourselves, was it February of this year? So if you were classified as elite, you could be allowed in. So DCU allowed me in for an hour a day, and you could shoot by yourself, but you had to rebound by yourself. If anybody knows, that's not what we want to do. We always want to have a rebounder. So everything was very individualized, but we got workouts that we could do by ourselves. So that kind of kept us going. But as soon as we got into training camp with everybody again, I remember that first training session very vividly. It was just, okay, we have to try and remember how to play with people now and again. And to be fair to us, especially with the Irish team, we didn't really let our fitness down. So the first couple of training sessions were just fine-tuning all the little things that we needed to focus in on again. Because, like, if you ever watch a basketball game, it's so quick that there's a lot of thinking that needs to be involved, and there's a lot of decision-making that needs to be made on the cuff. So that was the hardest thing to get back. But as soon as you got that back, you were grand. Like, our skills didn't really go down so much, but it was probably just that quick thinking that we needed to get back in rhythm again. Hydration, very important. And what's the diet? Is it very hard, high carb based, is it? Yeah, for any athlete, carbohydrates will be your best friend, and especially for a fast fast kind of endurance sport basketball is, because it's stop and go, but then at the same time it can be over the course of an hour and a half. So lots of carbohydrates before and after, especially if you're replenishing for the next day. And as you said, water is going to be your best friend, and some Lucasades thrown in there at halftime won't go amiss either.
Kieran, it's not the only sport that's indoors. Obviously, you got volleyball, you got squash, you got badminton. Nguyen was on the show here recently. They can't be forgotten either in all of this debate.
No, exactly. I mean, I was talking quite a bit to people from other sports, particularly Gary Stewart and volleyball Ireland, and that's it. It's just that I suppose basketball, being the biggest of the indoor sports, was in a position to lobby right away. But the indoor sports did bond or come together through the pandemic, and had a group within the Federation of Irish Sport, and I suppose they did kick up between them at various times because they were being overlooked at various times through the pandemic. Those other sports can't be forgotten, and it's great that they too have now got the exemption for the underage players and competitions can resume.
I don't know if this is the wrong question to ask, whatever, but any chance we'll ever see an Irish player make it in the NBA, Kieran?
Yeah, we can, but I sometimes think that's a bit of a silver bullet. I think it'd be better if we had 8 or 10 players playing in the first division in Spain. I know that, and we had an Irish team that maybe made the Eurobaskets in 5 years' time. As much as it would be obviously great, you don't want it to be just one Irish player. Then it would be, the measure of it is the second and third, fourth Irish player. I mean, we've had Susan Moran has been drafted to the WNBA. You have, again, going back to the health of the sport, you have more and more Irish players now playing D1 college and in the better leagues in Europe, because obviously they have Bosman status, which players, the Liam McHale's and Thomas Sullivan's, wouldn't have had in the 80s. So, there is a very good standard there that's getting better. The NBA is a quantum leap, but, it's not out of... It could easily happen in the next 10, 15 years, but that can be an outlier, and the measure of the sport is, by the end of the decade, can we get an Irish national team to the Eurobaskets? I think that's achievable, and that's a better measure than just the silver bullet of an NBA player who wouldn't be able to play for the national team, most likely.
That's a very fair statement, Kieran. Slow and steady wins the race. Thanks, Kieran.
Okay, thanks, John.
And Hannah, best of luck next week.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Hannah Thornton there and Kieran Shannon on basketball in Ireland, with indoor sports getting the break they deserved, and rightly so, from the government, that underage kids can play now, can play basketball, and they can have their season. So that's the Saturday panel for this week, a shortened Saturday panel. We've got football now all the way between 3 and 5 with Mark Lawrence and Dan McDonnell and Johnny Ward. I'm just looking at Roy Keane's face here on the screen. You don't even need the sound to know that he's absolutely disgusted at Manchester United. Manchester United 0, Manchester City 2. A stroll for Manchester City, an Eric Bailly own goal, and then a goal at the end of the first half from Bernardo Silva. Comfortable win for the champions. Going to reflect on that after this break.
Off the ball on News Talk. News Talk already gives you your daily fix of news and entertainment. But wouldn't you like a little bit more? More? News Talk Extra is everything you might have missed. Plus, expert tips, podcasts and competitions. All straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at newstalk.com/extra.
There's a new day coming. Air Business and Everest Technology Group have come together to form Air Evo, Ireland's #1 telecommunications and ICT solutions provider, and the first of its kind to redefine what's possible, making true end-to-end solutions possible for the first time in Ireland through innovation, expertise, and a unique connection between technology and people, so that you can innovate, evolve, and grow your business. Air Evo. Together we make possible. Find out more at airevo.ie.
How do you put a value on real expertise? How do you put a value on the training, experience, and precision that only an expert brings? Well, 8 out of 10 Irish drivers know how. Because when it comes to protecting the resale value of your Volkswagen, 8 out of 10 Irish drivers would pay more for a Volkswagen serviced by Volkswagen expert technicians. Help protect your resale value and keep your Volkswagen a Volkswagen. Book your classic service from only €179 at volkswagenservice.ie. Terms and conditions apply.
Afternoons are easy with insuremyvan.ie, Ireland's low-cost van insurance specialist. Get your business back on the road with Insure My Van's best price guarantee. For super savings, visit insuremyvan.ie. City Financial Marketing Group Limited, trading as insuremyvan.ie, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Gas Networks Ireland is changing Ireland's energy future. Thanks to natural gas, we already connect over 700,000